The air in the grand concert hall was thick with a special kind of silence. It wasn't the empty quiet of a room with no one in it. This was a full, heavy, and electric quiet, the kind that comes after a tremendous noise has ended. For the last 2 hours, that noise had been the sound of a piano being commanded by a master. The master was Viktor Volkov. His name was printed in elegant script on the program still clutched in warm hands. He was a man known across the world. When he played, critics used words like volcanic and a force of nature. His fingers, long and strong, could make the piano roar with the fury of a storm or whisper with the delicacy of a secret. Tonight, he had done just that. He had taken the audience on a journey through crashing waves of sound and into valleys of such quiet tenderness that people had forgotten to breathe. Now, the journey was over. The final, thunderous chord of a Rachmaninoff concerto had faded, leaving only its echo in the hearts of the listeners. Then, the applause began. It started as a single, crashing wave and then built into a continuous, roaring ocean of sound. People rose from their red velvet seats, their faces alight. They clapped until their hands stung. They shouted bravo from the depths of their chests. This was more than just politeness. This was a physical release of the emotion he had poured into them. Victor stood by the piano, a slight sheen of sweat on his forehead under the bright stage lights. He gave a small, formal bow. The applause grew louder. He bowed again, deeper this time, a hand on his heart. Still, the noise did not stop. He walked off stage, into the dark wing, but the pounding of hands did not fade. It was a demand. It was a call for more. He walked back on. The roar peaked. This was the ritual. The performer gives a gift. The audience shows its thanks. The performer accepts it. He sat back down at the piano for a brief, sparkling encore, a short, fiery piece by Scriabin that danced like a crackling flame. Another round of applause, another bow. It was after this fourth return to the stage that the evening's script began to change. The applause was finally beginning to soften, settling into a warm, contented hum. People were gathering coats, smiling at companions, starting to remember the world outside the hall. A stagehand, dressed in black, hurried onto the stage with a large bouquet of white lilies. He handed them to Victor. Victor took the flowers, smelling them with a theatrical breath. He held up a hand, and the last bits of chatter in the hall died away. His eyes, a bright, piercing blue, skinned the front rows. They often did this, looking for a friendly face, someone to share a final moment with before the night ended. His gaze landed on a woman sitting in the third row, just off to the left. She was not clapping wildly anymore. She sat perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap. She was elegant, in her late 60s perhaps, with silver hair swept up in a classic style. She wore a simple but beautiful dark blue dress. What struck Victor was her expression. While everyone around her buzzed with post-concert excitement, her face was a pool of calm. Her eyes were fixed on him, not with fanatical glee, but with a deep, profound understanding. It was the look of someone who had not just heard the music, but had truly listened to it. A familiar, mischievous impulse stirred in Victor. He was a serious artist, but off stage, he had a reputation for being a bit of a playful troublemaker. He enjoyed breaking the fourth wall, turning the formal concert into something a little more human. He saw in this calm woman a perfect opportunity for a bit of harmless, charming theater. He gestured toward her with the bouquet. The spotlight, following his cue, swung away from him and found her in the darkness of the seats. She blinked, a slight look of surprise on her face. A soft, curious murmur went through the audience. "What was he doing?" "For you, madam," Victor said, his voice rich and clear through the microphone. "For your wonderful attention tonight." He took a few steps to the edge of the stage, leaned down, and offered the bouquet. After a moment's hesitation, she stood and accepted it, a small, polite smile on her lips. The audience made a warm, ah sound. It was a sweet gesture, but Victor wasn't finished. The playful glint in his eye grew brighter. He walked back to the center of the stage, facing her. "But you know," he said, addressing the whole hall now, playing to the room. "In the old days, a gift demanded a gift in return. A trade." He turned his focus back to the woman, who was now sitting back down, the huge bouquet in her arms. "So, a flower for a flower. Perhaps you would play a little something for us? A small, final encore?" He spread his hands wide, as if the idea was the most natural in the world. The audience chuckled. It was a lovely, silly joke. They all understood the game. The great maestro was being gracious, including an audience member in the magic of the evening. They looked at the woman, expecting her to blush, to shake her head, to wave him away with a laugh. She did not laugh. She simply looked at him, her head slightly tilted. She didn't seem embarrassed. She seemed thoughtful. Victor, encouraged by the crowd's laughter, decided to raise the stakes. It was all in good fun. "Come now," he said, his tone light and teasing. "Surely you know *chopsticks*. Everyone knows *chopsticks*. He mimed a clumsy, one-finger piano plinking with his index fingers. The hall erupted in louder, warmer laughter. It was a gentle ribbing, a maestro playfully reminding everyone he was just a man, and that music could be simple and fun. The laughter began to die down. The woman carefully placed the bouquet of lilies on the empty seat beside her. She stood up again. The spotlight was still on her, making her silver hair glow. The hall grew very quiet, the air now charged with a new kind of curiosity. This was going further than the usual bit. She smoothed her dress. Then, in a calm, clear voice that carried without strain to the very back of the hall, she said 2 words, "Very well." A gasp, followed by a rush of excited whispers, swept through the audience. This was unexpected. People leaned forward in their seats. Smiles spread. This was turning into a truly memorable night. Would she actually go up there? Would she plink out *chopsticks* and get a huge round of encouraging applause? It would be a delightful, human moment. Victor's own smile widened, though for the first time. A tiny flicker of something else passed behind his eyes. Was this real? He had thrown out the challenge assuming it would be caught and tossed back. Now, she was catching it and holding on. But the crowd was loving it. The energy was fantastic. He recovered with a performer's grace, bowing deeply and sweeping his arm toward the gleaming black Steinway concert grand, as if presenting a throne. "The stage is yours," he announced, his voice booming with false bravado. He walked to the side of the stage and took a seat on a small bench meant for the orchestra, his body language one of relaxed, amused anticipation. He crossed his legs, resting his chin on his fist, a king awaiting a court jester's performance. All eyes were on the woman as she walked slowly, deliberately, to the short set of steps at the side of the stage. A different stagehand offered a hand to help her up. She took it with a quiet thank you. Her steps were measured, not nervous, but careful. She walked to the center of the vast stage, where the piano waited like a sleeping beast. She paused for a moment, looking out at the sea of faces, 1,000 pairs of eyes glittering in the dark. Then, she turned her back to them. She approached the piano bench. She did not sit immediately. First, she carefully adjusted the height, turning the knob slowly. She then placed the bouquet of lilies on the broad, closed lid of the piano. The white flowers against the black polish looked stark and beautiful. A final, deliberate touch. Then, she sat. She arranged the skirt of her dress. She placed her hands in her lap. She looked at the keyboard, a vast landscape of black and white. The silence in the hall was now absolute and heavy. The playful mood had evaporated, replaced by a tense, almost awkward suspense. The joke had gone quiet. What was she doing? Was she having second thoughts? Was she frozen? Victor, from his perch, felt a small, cold knot form in his stomach. This was stretching too long. The audience's patience for a comedy bit was thin. He had meant to create a moment of joy, not public agony. He started to think of a way to gracefully rescue her, to step in and thank her for her courage and move on. Just as he was about to rise, Clara moved. She didn't lift her hands with a performer's dramatic flair. She simply raised them and let them hover just above the keys, as if feeling their warmth. Her posture was not the arched, aggressive stance of a concert pianist. It was softer, older, more intimate. She lowered her hands. Her first touch on the keys was not to press them, but to almost caress them. Her fingers brushed the smooth ivory, a ghost of a touch that made no sound at all. The entire hall seemed to lean in, collectively holding its breath, and then she began to play. The sound that came from the piano was not what anyone expected. It was a single note, not loud, not soft, but full. It hung in the silent air of the hall like a clear drop of water, and in that note was a feeling of such deep, lonely sadness that the last traces of a smile vanished from every face. It was not the note of someone joking around. It was the note of someone remembering. The woman held that note, letting it fade slowly into nothing. Then came another, and another. They were slow, searching, like footsteps in an empty house. This was not *chopsticks*. This was not some simple tune everyone knew. This was something else entirely. The melody was beautiful, but it was a painful kind of beautiful, It sounded like a question that had no answer. From his seat at the side of the stage, Viktor Volkov felt his body go very still. The relaxed, amused pose was gone. He uncrossed his legs and sat up straight. His professional ear, which had heard a million notes played in a million ways, was suddenly wide awake. This was not the hesitant plinking of an amateur. The touch was too sure. The sound she pulled from the piano was a singing, rounded tone, not the hard, nervous strike of a novice. His mind raced, trying to place the music. It was familiar, a ghost from the edges of memory, but he couldn't name it. He watched her hands. They were not young hands. They were slender, with elegant fingers, but he could see the slight stiffness in the joints, the subtle map of veins on their backs. Yet they moved over the keys with a strange, fluid certainty. They didn't attack the piano. They persuaded it. In the audience, the mood had shifted completely. The people were no longer waiting for a funny end to a joke. They were being pulled into a world. They forgot about the famous maestro on the stage edge. All their attention was focused on the woman's back, on the curve of her shoulders as she leaned into the music. A man in the fifth row, who had come to the concert to forget a bad week at work, found his throat tightening. The music was speaking to a sadness he hadn't even told his wife about. A young music student in the balcony stopped breathing, her eyes wide. She had never heard a piano sound like that, so private, so heartbreakingly clear. The simple, searching melody began to change. It grew more complex. The left hand started a restless, murmuring pattern beneath the right hand's song. The music began to swirl, like leaves caught in a slow whirlwind. It was getting harder, much harder. The woman's hands began to move faster, crossing, leaping, but always with that same flowing grace. There was no showy bang, no flashy gesture. It was all story. It was all feeling. Victor's hand, which had been resting on his chin, slowly fell to his knee. His mouth was slightly open. He knew this piece now. It was Scriabin, Alexander Scriabin's second sonata, the Sonata Fantasy, a piece he himself had played as a much younger man, a piece so emotionally wild and technically demanding it had scared him a little. It was not a party trick. It was a mountain to climb, a storm to navigate, and she was climbing it. She was navigating it, not with his own powerful, athletic style, but with something different, something older and wiser. She played the furious passages not with raw anger, but with a deep, controlled grief that was somehow more powerful. When the music fell back into a moment of quiet, her touch became so tender it was almost unbearable to listen to. It was as if she were playing the memories of the notes, not just the notes themselves. He looked at her profile. Her eyes were fixed somewhere beyond the piano, on a point in the distant dark of the hall, or maybe on a point in time far in the past. Her face was calm, but there was a life in it now, a light that hadn't been there when she was just sitting in the audience. This was not a woman being put on the spot. This was a woman who had come home to a place she knew very, very well. A thought, cold and shocking, crashed into Victor's mind. Asterisk, she is better than I was at that piece. Asterisk, it wasn't about speed or power. It was about understanding. She understood the soul of the music in a way he never quite had. He had mastered the notes. She was conversing with the ghost inside them. A wave of heat rushed to his face. His playful challenge, his joke from a position of, now felt like the stupidest thing he had ever done. He had not pulled a random person onto the stage. He had summoned a ghost, a master. In the front row, the woman's companion, a friend she had come with, had tears streaming silently down her face. She knew the whole story. She knew the years of silence, the closed piano lid, the life lived in the quiet shadow of a monumental talent that had chosen to hide itself. Seeing her friend now, in the spotlight, playing with such lost and found glory, was like watching a miracle. The music built to its final, desperate climax. It was a torrent of sound, a cathartic wave of emotion that filled every corner of the vast hall. The woman's body moved with it, not in large, dramatic sweeps, but with a concentrated energy that seemed to come from the very center of her being. She wasn't performing for them. She was finally, after decades, letting something out. And then, it was over. The final chords were not loud, but they were final. They were too deep, resigned sighs from the piano, notes that spoke of acceptance, of a long journey ended. Her hands lifted from the keys and returned to her lap. The last sound faded into the most complete silence Victor had ever heard. It was a silence of awe, of collective breath held. The woman did not move. She stayed looking at that distant point, her shoulders rising and falling slightly with her breath. She seemed smaller now, as if the music had been a giant thing she had been carrying inside her and had finally set down. For 3 full seconds, nothing happened. No one clapped. No one moved. It was as if the audience was afraid to break the spell, to return to the real world from the one she had just painted in sound. Then, like a dam breaking, the sound came. It wasn't applause at first. It was a massive, unified exhalation, 1,000 people letting go of the breath they'd been holding. And then the clapping started. It was not the polite, happy applause from earlier. This was louder, wilder, more emotional. People were on their feet again, but this time they were shouting, crying, stamping their feet. The sound was physical, a wave of pure feeling that hit the stage. The woman blinked, as if waking from a deep sleep. She turned slowly on the bench and looked out at the roaring crowd. For a brief moment, she looked confused, as if she had forgotten where she was. Then, she gave a small, almost shy nod. Not a bow, just a simple acknowledgement. She stood up, her movements stiff now, the magic leaving her limbs. She collected the bouquet of lilies from the piano lid, holding it to her chest like a shield. She didn't look at Victor. She walked quickly, with a new purpose, to the same steps she had come up. She needed to get away from the noise, from the blinding light, from all those eyes. Victor sat frozen on his bench, the wall of sound crashing around him. He was still a part of the stage, but he felt completely invisible. The applause was not for him. He was a spectator, just like everyone else. He watched her go, a slender figure in blue disappearing into the dark wing of the stage. Carrying her white flowers, the audience kept clapping. They were clapping for her return. They wanted her back. They wanted to see her, to thank her properly, to understand what they had just witnessed. Victor finally stood up. The movement felt heavy. He walked to the center of the stage, into the spotlight that now felt hot and accusing. He held up his hands, trying to quiet the crowd. It took a long time. When the noise finally settled into a restless hum, he spoke into the microphone. His famous, rich voice sounded thin to his own ears. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said. He paused, swallowing hard. He looked toward the dark wing where she had vanished. Then he looked back at the audience, his face serious, all traces of the playful maestro gone. I believe I have to go and thank our unexpected guest properly. Please, excuse me for a moment." He didn't bow. He just turned and walked quickly off the stage, following her path into the shadows, leaving the buzzing, astonished audience behind. He had to find her. He had to know who she was. The joke was over. Now, he needed an answer. The backstage area was a different world. Out front, the hall was a cavern of echoing noise and bright light. Here, it was all shadows and tight, quiet spaces. The roar of the crowd was muffled, sounding like distant ocean waves hitting a faraway shore. Victor moved quickly, his dress shoes clicking on the concrete floor. He passed stacked equipment cases, coils of thick black cable, and a forgotten music stand. His mind was a storm. The sound of her playing was still ringing in his ears, louder than any applause. The image of her hands, so sure and so full of story, was burned into his eyes. The young stage hand, carrying a clipboard, pointed wordlessly down a narrow corridor. The green room, the kid whispered, his eyes wide with excitement. Even the crew had felt it. Victor nodded his thanks and hurried on. He reached a plain door with a star painted on it, the traditional dressing room for guest artists. He paused for a second, his hand on the cold metal handle. What was he going to say? "Sorry I made a joke of you? Who are you?" He took a breath and pushed the door open. The room was small and warmly lit. There was a worn sofa, a mirror surrounded by bare light bulbs, and a small table with a pitcher of water. She was standing by the table, her back to the door, placing the bouquet of lilies carefully next to the water pitcher. She had taken off her shawl. She looked smaller, more fragile under the plain lights, away from the magic of the stage. She turned as he entered. Her face was pale, and she looked tired, but her eyes were calm. There was no anger in them, no reproach, just a quiet weariness. The door clicked shut behind Victor, closing them into this quiet little box. The noise from the hall was just a faint rumble now. For a moment, they just looked at each other, the world-famous pianist and the woman from the third row. The air was thick with all the things that needed to be said. Victor spoke first. He didn't use his stage voice. His words came out soft, almost rough. I must apologize." He shook his head, searching for the right words. I was a fool. I had no idea." She gave a small, tired smile. It was a smile that held no malice. "There is nothing to apologize for. You gave a wonderful performance. And you offered a gift." She gestured lightly to the flowers. "But I was showing off," he said, the truth tumbling out. He took a step further into the room, not wanting to crowd her, but needing to bridge the space. "I was playing the charming maestro. I thought it would be a cute moment. I never imagined," he trailed off, waving a hand vaguely, trying to encompass the incredible thing that had just happened out there. "I know what you thought," she said gently. She poured a glass of water, her hand steady. "It is what anyone would have thought. Who are you?" The question burst from him. It was rude, blunt, but he couldn't hold it back. "That was Scriabin's second. You didn't just play the notes, you lived it. I have only heard it played like that a handful of times in my life." She took a slow sip of water, then sat on the edge of the sofa, smoothing her dress. She seemed to be gathering herself, deciding how far back in time she needed to go. "A long time ago," she began, her voice low and even. "In another country, I was a student, a piano student." She looked up at him. "At the Leningrad Conservatory." Victor felt a jolt go through him. The Leningrad Conservatory. It was a name that carried immense weight, a factory for geniuses, known for a brutal, glorious standard of excellence. It was his own musical heritage, though from a later generation. "You were a student of someone," he stated, not asked. She nodded. I was the favorite pupil of a man named Leonid Borisov." She saw the recognition flash in Victor's eyes. Borisov was a legend, a teacher from the old, severe school, a man who had trained a dozen of the century's great pianists. He had died many years ago. "He was very old when he taught me," he said. "I had the touch, the understanding." He said I could hear the color in the sound. She spoke simply, without pride. "It was just fact. I practiced 8, sometimes 10 hours a day. My whole life was the piano. The cold practice rooms, the sound of other students down the hall, the smell of old wood and dust. It was all I knew. I was going to compete. I was going to tour." She looked down at her hands, resting in her lap. "Then, two things happened. The larger world, and my smaller one." She paused. Victor didn't move. He didn't dare interrupt. "The political pressures," she continued. "For an artist, it was complicated. What you could play, what you must say. The weight of it began to sit on the music, to twist it. It became hard to breathe." She shook her head slightly, as if shaking off a memory. "And then, my brother, my only sibling, he was involved in things the state did not like. He was sent away, to a labor camp. We got one letter, then nothing." Her voice didn't crack. It was flatter now, the emotion pressed down by years. "He did not come back. My music, it died with him. The color went out of the sound. The piano became just a box of hammers and strings. To play, to express such feeling on a stage, when my heart was a stone, it felt like a lie, a betrayal of him, and of the real feeling that was gone." She looked up at Victor. "So, I stopped. I finished my studies, but I never gave a full recital. I never competed. When I had the chance to leave, I took it. I came here, to this country. I became a teacher. A good one, I hope. I taught children their scales. I guided teenagers through their sonatinas. I showed them how to listen. And for myself, the piano became a friend again, but a very private friend. I would play for an hour in the evening, for myself, just to remember, not to perform." Victor felt the room spin slightly. The story was so vast, so heavy. It explained everything. The incredible technique, forged in the fire of the world's toughest conservatory. The profound emotion, born of real, devastating loss. The quiet, anonymous life that had come after. He had challenged a retired master, a ghost of the golden age, sitting right there in his audience. "I am so sorry," he said again. And this time it meant so much more. He was sorry for her loss, for her silenced gift, for his own ignorant joke. "What you played out there, it was not a performance. It was a memory, a testament. It was the most honest music I have ever heard." She accepted this with another small nod. "It has been decades since I played that piece for another soul. I thought I had forgotten how. But when you asked, when the spotlight came, it was like a door opened. I saw my old teacher's face. I heard my brother's laugh. The muscle memory was still there. The heart memory. It came flooding back, from beyond the door. The muffled sound of the crowd changed. The steady rumble was now punctuated by rhythmic clapping and calls. They were getting impatient. They wanted resolution. Victor looked at the door, then back at her. A powerful idea was forming in him, cutting through his shame and awe. It was a reckless, Perhaps foolish idea, but it felt like the only right thing to do. They are calling for you, he said. She shook her head firmly. No, that part of my life is over. That was a moment, a gift back to you for your gift, a closing of a circle. I am content to slip out the stage door and go home to my quiet house. But they heard you, Victor insisted, his voice growing more passionate. They felt it. They deserve to thank you, and I deserve to make this right. Not as a joke, but as a tribute. She looked at him, curious now, wary. Come back out with me, he said, just for a moment. Not to play alone, to play asterisk with asterisk me. Her eyebrows raised. A duet, he said, the idea crystallizing. Something simple, clear, a conversation between two pianists. Not a competition, a partnership. He was thinking fast. The final movement of Mozart's sonata for two pianos. It is a conversation. It is joy. It is uncomplicated beauty. Please, he was begging now, not as Victor Volkov, the star, but as one musician to another. Let me share the stage with you, properly. Let me show them, and show you, my respect. She was silent for a long time. The crowd's chant was clearer now. They could almost make out the words. She looked at her hands, then at the bouquet of lilies, white and pure. She thought of her brother, who had loved music. She thought of her old, strict teacher who had believed in her. Finally, she let out a long, slow breath. The tension seemed to leave her shoulders. A faint, new light came into her eyes. Not the stormy light of the Scriabin, but something softer. Maybe it was the hint of a smile. Very well, she said again, for the second time that night. But this time, it meant something completely different. The walk back onto the stage felt different this time. Before, she had moved through a tunnel of amused curiosity, a novelty act. Now, Victor walked a half step behind her, his posture not of a presenter, but of an escort. The roaring wall of sound that hit them as they emerged from the wings was not just applause. It was a release of pent-up emotion, a cheer of pure gratitude and awe. She flinched slightly at the volume, the physical force of it. Victor, seeing this, did something simple. He offered her his arm, not in a grand, theatrical way, but in the manner of someone offering support to an elder crossing a busy street. She looked at his elbow, then at his face. His expression was serious, earnest. She placed her hand lightly on his arm, and together they walked to the center of the stage. Victor gestured for quiet. It took longer now, the crowd reluctant to let go of the energy they were giving. When the hall finally settled into a buzzing, expectant hush, he stepped to the microphone. He left her standing a few feet away, a dignified, solitary figure. Ladies and gentlemen, he began. His voice was different. The rich, performative tone was gone. He spoke plainly, like a man in his own living room, confessing something important. A little while ago, I made a joke. He paused, letting the words hang. I thought I was being charming. I thought I was creating a fun moment. I was, in truth, being rather foolish. He glanced at her, then back at the audience. I challenged a fellow musician to play, having no idea who she was. I have just had the honor of speaking with her backstage. I will not share her private story. It is hers to tell, if she ever chooses. But I will tell you this. We have been in the presence of a true artist tonight, not just during my performance, but during hers. An artist who studied at the feet of masters I can only read about in books. An artist who understands music on a level that humbles me. A murmur of profound respect rippled through the crowd. People leaned forward, straining to hear every word. I asked for an encore as a joke. Victor continued, his voice growing stronger with conviction. She gave us a gift of staggering beauty. And now, I wish to ask for something else. Not as a joke, but as a request. As one pianist to another. He turned fully to her. Would you do me the honor of allowing us to play together? A short piece, a conversation in music, so that I might, in some small way, thank you properly. He was not putting her on the spot. He was offering her the stage as an equal. The request hung in the air. Every person in the hall held their breath, hoping, wishing. The woman looked out at the sea of faces. The fear, the reluctance from before was gone. In its place was a quiet resolve. She gave Victor a single, firm nod. A wave of relieved delight swept through the audience. This was what they wanted. Not an ending, but a continuation. Victor clapped his hands together once, a practical sound. He turned to the stage hands waiting in the wings and gestured quickly. They understood. With efficient, quiet speed, two more stage hands appeared, and together they began to move the second, smaller concert piano that had been sitting off to the side. It was usually for concerto performances. They wheeled it center stage, placing it so its curve faced the curve of the grand piano. The two instruments now looked like two black shells in conversation, or like parentheses waiting to enclose a final thought. While this was happening, Victor spoke softly to her. "Mozart, the final movement of the sonata in D major. Do you know it?" A faint, real smile touched her lips for the first time. "It has been a very long time. But yes, I know it. Shall we? No pressure, just let's play," he said. They took their places. She sat at the grand piano, the one she had just conquered. He sat at the smaller one. They adjusted their benches, opened their keyboards. There was a moment of simple, practical preparation, a settling in, a finding of the right distance from the keys. The audience watched this quiet ritual, utterly captivated. Victor looked across the space between them, over the polished wood of the piano lids. He raised his eyebrows, a question in his eyes. Ready? She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. He began, a bright, clear cascade of notes, the joyful and precise opening theme of the Mozart. It was playful, like sunlight on water. He played his opening line, then nodded toward her, his hands pausing, and she answered. Her touch on the Mozart was different from her Scriabin. It was lighter, clearer, but it still had that unmistakable singing quality, that depth of tone that made every note meaningful. She played the answering phrase, and it fit perfectly, not as an echo, but as a companion. This was the magic of the piece. It was a true duet, a back and forth, a musical dialogue where one voice stated an idea and the other responded, sometimes agreeing, sometimes playfully challenging, sometimes weaving together in harmony. At first, Victor led. He set the tempo, the dynamic. He was, after all, the one who played this repertoire on world stages every night. But within a few bars, something beautiful began to happen. He started to listen, not just to wait for his turn, but to truly hear what she was doing. Her phrasing was slightly slower, more considered. She lingered on certain notes, letting them sing in a way that gave the cheerful music a sudden, surprising warmth and wisdom. It wasn't sad. It was joyful with experience. And Victor, the world-renowned virtuoso, adapted. He softened his own attack to match her tone. He eased back on the tempo, just a fraction, to settle into her comfortable space. It wasn't a concession. It was an act of respect, of true musical partnership. He was following her lead. The music began to sparkle. It was a conversation between two lives. His was the voice of the present, brilliant and assured. Hers was the voice of the past, rich with memory and refined skill. They traded melodies. They played passages in perfect, rippling unison. Their two sets of hands a blur of synchronized motion. The woman's face changed as she played. The weight of the solo performance lifted. This was not about plumbing the depths of her soul alone. This was about connection, about making something beautiful with another person. A look of simple, focused pleasure came over her. She glanced across at Victor during a rest, and he smiled at her, a real, unguarded smile of shared delight. For the audience, it was mesmerizing to watch. They could see the communication, the silent agreement between the two players. They could hear how the music was richer, more layered, more alive because it was a blend of these two distinct voices. It was no longer Victor Volkov, star and mysterious woman. It was simply two pianists, lost in the joy of the thing they both loved most. The final section of the movement was a whirlwind of speedy, precise notes, a shared celebration. They leaned into it together, their heads nodding in identical time, completely in sync. The music built to its climax, a flurry of joyful sound, and ended with two crisp, perfect chords, one from each piano, sounding as one, bang, bang. Silence for a heartbeat. Then, the eruption. This was the loudest applause of the night, a deafening, unanimous roar of pure happiness. People were on their feet, cheering, shouting, many crying openly. They were cheering for the music, for the surprise, for the woman's hidden mastery, and for Victor's humble, graceful response. They were cheering for the story that had unfolded before them. Victor immediately stood and walked over to her. She was rising from the bench, looking a bit overwhelmed by the wall of sound. He didn't bow to the audience. Instead, he took her hand gently in both of his. He leaned in and said something in her ear, lost in the noise. Then, turning to the audience, he raised their joined hands together. It was a clear, powerful statement. Tonight, we are equals. He led her to the front of the stage, and this time, they bowed together, a deep, sincere bow. She, holding his hand for balance, dipped her head, her silver hair gleaming under the lights. When they straightened, Victor made a sweeping gesture toward her, giving her the full credit, the full spotlight. She accepted it with a queen's grace, a small, dignified smile on her face. The applause washed over her, not as a frightening force, but as a warm embrace. She had been seen, not just as a curiosity, but as the artist she truly was. After several bows, as the applause showed no sign of stopping, Victor again escorted her off the stage, his hand lightly on her back, guiding her through the blinding lights and into the welcoming dark of the wings. This time, they left for good, but the audience kept clapping. They clapped until their hands were sore, clapping for the performance that was over, and for the human story they had been lucky enough to witness. They had come to hear a famous man play, but they would leave talking about the duet the moment a maestro stepped aside, listened, and played not as a soloist, but as a partner. It was a night that reminded everyone why they loved music in the first place, not just for the notes, but for the connection they could create between two strangers on a stage, and between the stage and every heart in the room. The heavy stage door clicked shut behind them, cutting off the ocean of applause like a switch had been flipped. They were in a narrow, concrete loading bay, lit by a single harsh yellow bulb. The night air was cool and smelled of damp pavement and distant city traffic. It was the real world, simple and plain. For a moment, they just stood there in the quiet, listening to their own breathing. The woman leaned against the rough brick wall, closing her eyes. She looked exhausted, but in a peaceful way, like someone who has just finished a long, difficult, and worthwhile journey. Victor stood beside her, unsure what to do next. The grand gestures were over. The stage was behind them. Here, they were just two people in an alley. "Can I call a car for you?" he asked, his voice quiet in the stillness. "Or perhaps, would you allow me to give you a ride home? It is the least I can do." She opened her eyes and considered him. The piercing, formal maestro was gone. The man before her looked younger somehow, and genuinely concerned. "A ride would be kind," she said finally. "Thank you," while Victor spoke softly into his phone. She watched the moths dance around the yellow light. The adrenaline was draining away, leaving a deep, bone-tired ache, but also a strange lightness. A thing she had carried for 50 years was no longer inside her. She had laid it down on the keys of that piano, and the audience had witnessed it, and that was enough. A sleek black car pulled into the alley a few minutes later. Victor opened the rear door for her, a gesture from another era. She slid in, and he went around to the other side. As the car pulled out onto the quiet, lamplit streets, the city gliding past the windows, neither spoke. The silence was comfortable, filled with the hum of the engine and the soft radio playing classical music at a low volume. It was she who broke it. "You adapted to my tempo," she said, not looking at him, but watching the blurred lights. "In the Mozart, you pulled back. You listened." Victor nodded, staring at his own hands in his lap. "It was the only thing to do. You were not playing the notes. You were speaking them. To play louder or faster would have been like shouting over someone telling a beautiful story." He turned to her. "I have never followed another pianist like that. It was a lesson." She gave a soft, almost soundless laugh. "And I have not followed anyone, or led anyone, in a very long time. It felt good to make music with someone again. Not as a student, not as a teacher, just as a player." They lapsed back into silence, but the air between them was easier now. The car eventually turned onto a tree-lined street of older, well-kept houses. She pointed to a small, white bungalow with a dark green door and a porch light glowing. "Here, please." The car stopped. Victor got out quickly and came around to open her door. She gathered her shawl and the now slightly wilted bouquet of lilies. They walked together up the short, neat path to her front door. She unlocked it, then turned to face him. The porch light cast soft shadows on her face. "Would you like to come in? For a cup of tea? It is late, I know." "I would like that very much," Victor said, and he meant it. The inside of the house was warm and smelled of books and old wood. It was tidy, but lived in. Bookshelves lined the walls, filled with scores and novels and books on art. Framed prints of old masters hung beside a few faded photographs. In the corner of the small living room, by a window that likely caught the morning sun, was an upright piano. It was a good, solid instrument, but not a concert grand. Its lid was closed, and on top rested more framed photos and a small, healthy potted plant. She gestured for him to sit on a comfortably worn sofa and went into the kitchen. He heard the quiet clink of cups, the whistle of a kettle. He looked around the room. This was the sanctuary of the artist he had just heard. This was where the private music had lived. She returned with a tray holding to steaming cups of tea and a small plate of simple biscuits. She sat in an armchair across from him. For a few minutes, they just drank their tea, the warmth spreading through them. "May I ask?" Victor began carefully, setting his cup down. "What will you do now, after tonight?" She knew what he meant. Not about the next day, but about the music. "I will do what I have always done," she said calmly. "I will teach my students on Tuesday and Thursday afternoons. Mrs. Callahan's grandson is finally understanding Bach, and it is a joy to see. I will tend to my garden. I will play this piano here, for myself, in the evenings," she smiled. "Perhaps I will even open the Scriabin again, for fun." "But the world heard you tonight," Victor said, leaning forward. "There will be talk. People will try to find you. Managers, promoters. They will want you to perform." She shook her head, a firm, final motion. "No, that life does not fit me. It is a suit I outgrew a lifetime ago. The stage is for you, for others who need that conversation with 1,000 people. My conversation is here." She looked toward her piano, and perhaps, sometimes, with one other person, she met his eyes. He understood. The performance was not a comeback. It was a single, perfect bloom on a plant that was happy in its own quiet pot. It was a story that had reached its right and proper ending. "I have a request," Victor said. "An idea forming, not a demand, a request. Would you allow me, just once, to come and visit? Not to talk, to play, just as we did tonight. Perhaps for hands on your piano here? Or you could teach me that Scriabin. I never truly understood it until tonight." She looked at him for a long moment, her head tilted. She saw no pity in his face, no charity. She saw only the honest desire of a musician who had found a source of truth. "You would come here? To this small room? This is where the music is," he said simply, gesturing around the quiet, book-filled space. "The hall out there, that is where the performance is." They are not always the same thing. A genuine, warm smile spread across her face then, the first full one he had seen. It transformed her, taking years off her face. "Then yes," she said, "I would like that. Next time you are in the city. The kettle is always on." He finished his tea and stood, knowing it was time to go. He felt like an intruder on her peace, a whirlwind that had blown through and now needed to leave the calm behind. At the door, he turned. He didn't know what to call her. Meister felt too formal for this green-doored house. She solved it for him. She offered her hand. "It was a great pleasure to meet you, truly." He took her hand, not to shake it, but to hold it gently in both of his, as he had on stage. "The honor," he said, his voice thick with emotion he couldn't hide, "was entirely mine. Thank you for the lesson, in music and in everything." He left then, walking down the path to the waiting car. He did not look back. He knew the image he wanted to keep, her framed in the lighted doorway of her own life, holding her lilies. Finally at peace. The news of the concert hall miracle did spread, of course. A few audience members had filmed parts on their phones. The videos, shaky and muffled, went viral. The classical music world buzzed with rumors. Who was the mystery woman? Volkov upstaged by an amateur. The stories grew wilder. Reporters called Victor's management. They offered him large sums for an exclusive interview. He declined them all. When pressed at his next concert in another city, he simply said to the gathered press, "I was privileged to witness a moment of true art. It is not my story to tell. Some gifts are meant to be received, not packaged and sold." He never spoke her name publicly. He never revealed her history. To do so would have been to betray the quiet trust in that small living room. But once a season, when his tour brought him to that city, a black car would disappear into a tree-lined neighborhood in the evening. He would spend 2 or 3 hours in a white bungalow with a green door. Neighbors would sometimes hear the sound of a piano from within, not the roaring of a virtuoso, but the intricate, woven sound of 4 hands, of 2 voices in patient, joyful dialogue. Sometimes they heard laughter. And in the grand concert halls around the world, Victor Volkov's playing began to change, ever so slightly. The critics wrote that a new depth had emerged, a new patience in his slower passages. They called it maturity. He knew it was something else. It was the memory of a different kind of mastery. It was the understanding that the loudest note is not the most profound, and that the greatest artists are not always the ones on the stage. Sometimes they are in the 3rd row, listening, waiting for a foolish, joyful challenge to finally come home.